Imagine the bustling streets of turn-of-the-century Warsaw, then part of Congress Poland, where a certain June day in 1894 reportedly saw the birth of a girl who would set the art world aflame with her razor-sharp lines, modernist flair, and unapologetic pursuit of pleasure. Or perhaps she was born in St. Petersburg. Accounts differ, which rather suits the mythic aura she cultivated around herself. Official records generally settle on Warsaw, and that is how the legend often begins. Tamara de Lempicka, the future star of Art Deco painting, arrived in a place and time marked by upheaval and possibility. Her father was Boris, born Beno Gurwik-Gorsky, a Russian Jewish lawyer dealing with French commercial interests. Her mother, Malwina Dekler, came from a Polish Jewish background and had lived abroad for most of her youth. Both had converted to Protestantism in 1891 through the Polish Reformed Church. They baptized Tamara and her siblings, Stanisław and Adriana, as Protestant converts in Moscow not long after. From the start, Tamara orbited within Warsaw's higher social circles by virtue of her grandparents, Bernard and Clementina Dekler, who knew luminaries like the celebrated Ignacy Jean Paderewski and pianist Artur Rubinstein. Between the plush living rooms and artistic gatherings, Tamara soaked up the atmosphere of privilege and intrigue, though her family's posh veneer could not fully shield them from an ever-shifting political climate. By the time she was 10, her mother hired a renowned local artist to capture young Tamara's likeness in pastel. The child absolutely loathed sitting still for it. She found the final portrait so disappointing that she took the chalk herself, grabbed her younger sister as a model, and produced her own version of a portrait. It was her first known exercise in shaping the world to her taste through art. That small, nearly incidental moment foretold the unstoppable force she would become. When Tamara was around 17, her parents, who were dealing with the strains of a failing marriage, sent her to a boarding school in Lausanne, Switzerland. She found the place stifling. Feigning illness to escape, she convinced her family to let her travel, instead with her grandmother, an excursion that took them through Italy. Amidst Florence's Renaissance masterpieces and Venice's shimmering canals, Tamara's fascination with art deepened. The seeds of her future aesthetic, vivid, dramatic, seductive, were quietly being planted as she wandered through galleries and cathedrals. Eventually, her parents divorced. Tamara chose to spend summer 1912 in St. Petersburg with her wealthy Aunt Stefa, just as the Russian Empire stood on the brink of transformation that would soon convulse the entire region. In 1915, Tamara fell in love with a dashing Polish lawyer named Tadeusz Wempicki. The couple married that same year, some records say 1916, in Zarskoye Selo. Their comfortable existence, financed by a large dowry from Tamara's side, was short-lived. The Russian Revolution of 1917 struck like lightning. Tadeusz was arrested by the Cheka, the newly formed Bolshevik secret police, under suspicion of having served as a member of the Tsar's secret force. In a moment that exemplified her resourcefulness, Tamara negotiated his release, possibly trading her favors to the Swedish consul who helped her. It was a precarious rescue mission that underscored how fiercely protective and daring she could be. The newly freed Tadeusz and Tamara fled first to Copenhagen, then London, and finally landed in Paris, where her family also had found safe harbor. By 1918, they were effectively refugees, adjusting to life in a city that was still reeling from the First World War, but also bristling with post-war artistic fervor. Upon arriving in Paris, the young couple lived off the sale of whatever valuables they had salvaged from Russia, including Tamara's family jewels. Tadeusz showed little inclination to work, a passivity that did not sit well with Tamara, especially once their daughter, Maria Cristina, nicknamed Kizet, was born in 1919. Money grew tight. Necessity propelled Tamara to channel the talent she had carried within her since that childhood pastel fiasco. At her sister's urging, she set out to become a professional painter. She had briefly studied at the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts, then continued her training at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière in Paris under Maurice Denis, and more importantly, André Lotte. Denis taught her the discipline of craftsmanship. The idea that before a painting is a woman on a chaise or a war horse, it is a carefully arranged composition of shapes and colors on a flat surface. Lotte, for his part, was a refined cubist who eschewed the more radical edges of Picasso and Braque. His cubism had softened angles, enough to appeal to well-heeled patrons who wanted something modern yet still figurative, something that would look luxurious in their living rooms. Tamara's first attempts in Paris were modest. She painted still lifes, portraits of little Kizet and images of her neighbors. She sold them through a small gallery called Galerie Colette Weil, inching her way into the city's artistic circles. Step by step, she earned invitations to prestigious exhibitions like the Salon des Indépendants, the Salon d'Automne, and the Salon des Moins de 30 ans. Curators and critics began noting her distinctive style, a head-turning fusion of bold lines, saturated hues, and glossy sophistication. Early on, she even signed her paintings, Lempicka, adopting a masculine form of her name, perhaps to shield herself behind a more serious-sounding moniker, or to stand out among the many aspiring artists in town. Her big break arrived in 1925, a watershed year for the global art scene as Paris hosted the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts. This show would later give the name Art Deco to the entire cultural movement. Lempicka displayed her works in two important venues, the Salon des Tuileries and the Salon des Femmes Peintres. American fashion journalists from Harper's Bazaar and other major glossies were in attendance, eager to catch glimpses of the new wave of style. They spotted Lempicka's canvases and recognized something fresh, edgy, and enthralling. Almost overnight, her name began circulating among the chic set. That same year, her first major exhibition was hosted in Milan by Count Emanuele Castelbarco. In a breathtaking sprint of creativity, Tamara painted 28 pieces in 6 months, traveling through Italy and indulging in the romantic entanglements that seemed to accompany every phase of her life. She had a fling with the Marquis Sommi Picenardi, crossed paths with the famous poet Gabriele D'Annunzio, each trying to seduce or outmaneuver the other, and returned to Paris with her reputation firmly elevated. She capped off the 1920s in triumphant style. In 1927, she won a major prize at the Exposition Internationale des Beaux-Arts in Bordeaux for a portrait of Kizet titled Kizet on the Balcony. In 1929, another depiction of Kizet at her first communion landed a bronze medal at an exhibition in Poznan, Poland. Yet while her professional star soared, her marriage to Tadeusz crumbled. They divorced in 1928, and soon after, she began an affair with Baron Raoul Kuffner, who came from a once prosperous Austro-Hungarian family. He initially commissioned Tamara to paint his then mistress, Nana de Herrera. Once that portrait was complete, the Baron set his sights on Tamara herself, and the two embarked on a relationship that would define the next phase of her life. Financially emboldened, Tamara purchased a stylish apartment on Rue Méchin. She enlisted the modernist architect Robert Mallet Stevens and her sister Adrienne to transform it into a showplace of functionality and austere chic. It was widely photographed for decoration magazines, reinforcing her image as the personification of streamlined modern elegance. In 1929, she turned out one of her most iconic works, Auto Portrait, Tamara in a Green Bugatti. Painted for the cover of the German fashion magazine Die Dame, it depicted her as a sleek, helmeted driver in a racing car, a luscious statement of power, independence, and refined sensuality. In reality, she drove a small yellow Renault, not a Bugatti, but the idea of her zipping around Europe in a high-end racing machine was too enticing for the public to resist. The painting became a symbol of the Jazz Age woman, fearless, stylish, and unattainable. Around that time, she ventured to the United States for the first time, invited by a wealthy American oil family to do a portrait in Pittsburgh. She hoped for a lucrative tour, but the 1929 stock market crash undid her plans. The money she earned disappeared in a bank collapse, and though she did manage to complete the commissioned portrait, it ended up in storage following a divorce in the family she was working for. Nonetheless, the swirl of drama only boosted her myth. Throughout the 1930s, she painted aristocrats and royalty alike. King Alfonso XIII of Spain, Queen Elizabeth of Greece, garnering more prestige. She exhibited in Chicago with heavyweights like George O'Keeffe and Willem de Kooning, forging a reputation as one of the shining stars of the era, even as the worldwide economic crisis deepened. Tragedy struck in 1933 when the Baron's wife died. Tamara and Kuffner soon married in Zurich in 1934, cementing her position as a baroness. Yet she grew increasingly unnerved by the political climate, Hitler's rise, the spread of fascism, the drumbeats of another impending war. She pleaded with Kuffner to sell his properties in Hungary, which he did, and they shifted much of his fortune to Switzerland. The swirling terrors in Europe made them consider an eventual move to the United States. When World War II broke out, Tamara and Kuffner wasted no time. By winter 1939, they sailed to the U.S. and settled initially in Los Angeles, taking up residence in a Beverly Hills home that had once belonged to film director King Vidor. She expected to dazzle Americans as she had Parisians, but her style, so quintessentially Art Deco, clashed with the shifting tastes in post-war modernism. The polished geometry of the 1920s and early 1930s began to feel old-fashioned compared to abstract expressionism. Shows in New York, San Francisco, and Milwaukee did not achieve the success she had hoped. Nonetheless, Tamara kept painting, society portraits here, still lifes there, trying to find a foothold in an art world that had moved on. In 1941, her daughter Kizette, who had stayed behind in Nazi-occupied France, managed to escape via Lisbon and rejoined the family in Los Angeles. Soon, Kizette married a Texas geologist, Harold Foxhall, and moved away, leaving Tamara to her restlessness once more. In 1943, Tamara and Kuffner headed to New York, setting up shop in a city teeming with wartime production and waves of new art movements. Yet the commissions were fewer now, and the Baroness found herself leaning into her social life to maintain the sense of glamour that had once surrounded her so effortlessly in Paris. By the time the war ended, the halo around Art Deco had faded. She attempted to adapt, venturing into abstract painting in the early 1960s. She swapped her smooth brushwork for a palette knife, turning out thick textural pieces that looked nothing like her crisp, lustrous earlier portraits. Critics and collectors, still enthralled by her 1920s work, showed little interest in these new experiments. Often, Tamara ended up repainting older pieces in her new style, smoothing or blurring the once sharp lines. Personal sorrow followed. Baron Kuffner died of a heart attack in 1961 on an ocean liner, leaving Tamara a widow for the second time. Heartbroken and adrift, she sold many possessions, traveled the globe by ship, but never regained a stable sense of home. Eventually, in 1963, she moved to Houston to be near Kizette and her family, effectively retiring from her professional art career. She never quit painting altogether, though. In her final years, she would revisit iconic images like her famous auto portrait from 1929, recreating them at smaller scales or with slight variations. She even painted a fourth rendition of St. Anthony near the end of her life, though the magic of her prime was gone, and she seemed more a restless spirit trying to recapture a vanished epoch. In 1974, she made her last big move, packing up for Cuernavaca, Mexico. The climate was warm, the pace mellow, and it offered her a final place of refuge. She lived there quietly, her health failing, with Kizette eventually coming to care for her. On March 18, 1980, Tamara de Lempicka died in her sleep. She had requested that her ashes be scattered over Popocatépetl, an active volcano near Mexico City, a dramatic final flourish for a woman who spent her life shaping the world to her own design. As fate would have it, the world's interest in Art Deco rose from the ashes not long before and after her passing. A 1960s and 70s revival of the style led to reevaluations of Tamara's significance. In 1972, a retrospective of her work in Paris garnered positive reviews, and in 1977 an expansive catalog by Italian publisher Franco Maria Ricci further amped up interest. By the time she died, the stage was set for a posthumous rediscovery. Major collectors snapped up her canvases in the 1980s and 1990s, drawn by their glossy surfaces and unabashed glamour. People sought out Autoportrait, Tamara in a green Bugatti, as a prime example of Jazz Age exuberance. Theater productions dramatized her storied life. A play called Tamara, inspired by her bizarre meeting with Gabriele D'Annunzio, ran for over a decade in Los Angeles, occupying a grand old building and immersing audiences in a scandalous, intimate performance. Part of her enduring appeal was that she had lived her art. She cultivated a persona of glittering modernity, fast cars, racy love affairs, stylish hats angled over half-closed eyes, long before it was fashionable for women to do so. And yes, she had more than a few love affairs. She was famously bisexual, and her personal life was a labyrinth of passion that included men and women of all stripes. These relationships set tongues wagging in the 1920s Paris, especially given the circles she ran in. The poet Vida Sackville-West, writer Colette, the bohemian scene of Montparnasse, the flamboyant singer Susie Solidor. The 1920s was an era of liberated mores in certain enclaves, but Tamara took it to extremes that fueled her legend. Her daughter Kizette, ironically, saw more of her mother on canvas than in real life. Tamara minted Kizette into a near-iconic motif, Kizette in pink, 1926, Kizette on the balcony, 1927, Kizette sleeping, 1934. She returned to her daughter's face over and over, perhaps as a testament to an unspoken regret at being so frequently absent. Elsewhere, her subject matter spanned from languid nudes to shimmering society portraits, and even occasional religious-themed paintings in her later phase. She sometimes tried to replicate the solemn grandeur of Renaissance Madonnas, but critics found those attempts weaker than the crackling energy of her earlier Ingres-inspired sensuality. Lempicka's hallmark was a style that fused the elongated grace of Renaissance aesthetics with the crisp geometry of modernism. She revered Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres for his meticulous lines, as well as the softened cubist approach taught by André Lotte. The result was a painting style that was instantly recognizable. Smooth surfaces, luminous fabrics, sculpted cheekbones, and a certain defiant tilt of the head in her sitters. As she put it, "I was the first woman to make clear paintings. Among 100 canvases, mine were always recognizable. I was searching for technique, craft, simplicity, and good taste. My goal? Never copy. Create a new style." She insisted that many of her contemporaries had devolved into what she viewed as destructive novelty, whereas she aimed for a luminous, refined approach. Though she soared at her peak, the post-1930s shift toward abstraction left her behind. She tried to change with the times, but critics and wealthy clients alike valued her for the Art Deco flair that had once been so in vogue. The Second World War and its aftermath introduced new movements and ideologies in art. She found herself out of step, her brilliance overshadowed by the swirl of global transformation. And so for a couple of decades, she led a strange half-exile in the United States, occasionally re-emerging for an exhibition, but never recapturing that star status of the 1920s. Still, once the Art Deco revival took root, everything changed. In the latter half of the 20th century, her paintings regained the glamour they had once possessed. Celebrities and collectors clamored for a Lempicka. Hollywood icon Madonna is perhaps the most famous modern champion of her work. She not only collects Lempicka's paintings, but also featured them in music videos like Open Your Heart and Vogue, and displayed them as stage backdrops during the world tours. It was as though Tamara's sumptuous style had found its perfect 20th and 21st century spokesperson, a pop star equally enthralled by the interplay of sex, power, and luxury. Other high-profile fans include Jack Nicholson, Barbra Streisand, and Wolfgang Joop, further fueling the unstoppable rise of Lempicka's market value. On the art market, her paintings have fetched astronomical sums. As recently as November 2019, La Tunique Rose, 1927, sold at Sotheby's for $13.4 million, followed a few months later by Portrait of Marjorie Ferry, 1932, setting a new record at Christie's, £16.3 million, about $17.5 million, $21.2 million. It's a staggering figure for a painter whose style was once deemed passé, but the cyclical nature of artistic trends and the relentless allure of 1920s decadence gave Tamara de Lempicka an enviable afterlife. The brash clarity of her canvases, those dangerously red lips, those steel gray eyelids, those intricately folded satins, mirrors a cultural longing for an era of jazz clubs, smoky salons, and cocktail-fueled nights. She evaded the Bolsheviks in Russia, overcame the 1929 crash, navigated the Second World War, and weathered waves of changing artistic trends. Her personal motto, as she liked to say, was that there are no miracles. There is only what one makes. This fierce independence fueled her flamboyant reputation. She lived the Jazz Age high life in Montparnasse, left behind the smoking rubble of one marriage, embarked on another with a baron, and hopped across continents to avoid war and social disruption. The flamboyance spilled into her personal relationships as well. She famously held lavish gatherings, indulged in numerous affairs, and marched into social circles that might have tried to reject her. Though her final years in Mexico were subdued, with her health declining and only Kizet for close company, her posthumous presence loomed larger than ever. The 1980s and 90s saw a string of exhibitions, reprints of her earlier pieces, and new scholarship that labeled her a pioneer of a distinctly female modernism. A one-woman show titled Deco Diva, performed by actress-artist Kara Wilson, captured the intrigue and scandal of Lempicka's life. Ellis Avery's novel The Last Nude reimagined her relationship with one of her models, adding a layer of romantic drama to an already dramatic biography. And then there is Tamara, the immersive play that once enthralled Los Angeles for over a decade, a testament to the near-mythical stature she achieved. The production turned the audience into participants who roamed from room to room, eavesdropping on romantic intrigues that might or might not be historically accurate, but certainly evoked the mesmerizing swirl of Lempicka's existence. Meanwhile, contemporary institutions continue to celebrate her. The National Museum in Krakow launched a major retrospective of her works, borrowing pieces from global private collections and museums. That exhibit, titled simply Lempicka, drew throngs of visitors, many of whom came specifically to see the original paintings behind those ubiquitous magazine reproductions. People lingered in front of her famed nudes, such as La Belle Raffaella, a canvas that exudes the same taut sensuality that once electrified Paris salons. Others studied works like Adam and Eve, 1931, a rare instance in which Lempicka painted a male nude, nestling him into the composition with the same sculptural elegance she granted her female figures. Her bold sexuality was part of lesbian and bisexual subcultures that included luminous names like Violet Trefusis and Colette. She worshipped beauty wherever she found it, channeling desire into her canvases. Whether it was a pale female nude or a society matron in a shimmering gown, each subject boasted that signature Lempicka shin, the polished geometry and pointedly seductive aura. She often portrayed her lovers, like the poet Ira Perot, in ways that transcended portraiture and became intimate declarations. One of her best-known depictions of Ira is from 1931, a painting with swirling white satin and calla lilies that practically pulses with romantic tension. Tamara de Lempicka did not fade. She roared across decades, her canvases slicing through time with the same fierce precision that shaped her life. She defied revolutions, outlived empires, seduced high society, and bent art to her will. In an era that demanded women be muses, she chose to be a creator, a myth maker, and a legend. Every sharp line she drew, every gleam of satin and steel she immortalized, stands as a testament. Glamour is power, beauty is rebellion, and identity is a masterpiece we carve for ourselves. In the gallery of history, Tamara's gaze remains unbroken, cool, commanding, and utterly unrepentant.